Welcome to the first of two videos for this session. This video is called What is IDM? Definition, Purpose, and Structure. IDM stands for Inquiry, Design, Model. The activity that students are participating in is called an inquiry. This sheet is the sheet that we'll be looking at throughout this video that gives us all of the information that we need to know about how students participate in an inquiry. The learning intentions for this video are to learn about the definition, purpose, and benefits of IDM, to learn about the structure of IDM, and to learn where to find pre-made inquiries. Our success checks are I can describe the purpose of IDM, I can identify the structure of IDM, and I can find pre-made inquiries. Inquiry Design Model allows students to act as historians by investigating sources and synthesizing information to answer a compelling question. The purpose of IDM is to give students an authentic experience with asking questions and crafting an argument using evidence. An inquiry is longer than a lesson, but shorter than a unit. So if our first unit is 4 weeks, we'll take part of that to complete an inquiry. Inquiries normally last around 3 to 5 days, depending on what you and your students need out of it. The intention is not to take away from time spent learning content, but to learn the content through the inquiry process. While participating in an inquiry, students work with the content, answer questions and complete tasks that are relevant to their experience, and make an argument or claim using evidence from primary sources. So they really are acting as historians while they look at sources, complete tasks, and make a claim using evidence. IDM has three components that work together to engage the student. The first component is questions. This is probably the most important because it encourages the students to ask and answer questions. The second component is tasks. And the third component are the sources. On this sheet that we saw at the beginning of the video, all three of these components are visible so that when you're looking at this sheet, you know exactly what those questions, tasks, and sources are. There are a couple of different places where there are questions. There's the compelling question at the top, and then the supporting questions. We also have our tasks, and again, there's a couple of different places where you can see the tasks that students will be completing. Staging the question would be the first task they complete. Then we have formative performance tasks, and then the summative performance task. And then finally, there's one place where you'll see the sources that students can use, and that's going to be right there in the middle of that sheet. We're going to start by looking at the questions and what they are and how to use them during the inquiry. The ultimate goal of every inquiry is for the student to answer the compelling question. So we have a couple of examples of compelling questions. One compelling question might be, who's to blame for the Cold War? And this is from the Cold War inquiry for 11th grade. How could Americans be happier for the economic happiness inquiry intended for 12th grade? How would our lives be different if we lived in a different community for the urban, suburban, and rural inquiry intended for 2nd grade? Is betrayal always bad for the Betrayal and American Revolution inquiry intended for 5th grade? And then, was the development of agriculture good for humans for the agriculture inquiry in 6th grade? And I picked each of these compelling questions to kind of illustrate that the topics and the questions associated with inquiries really do go through a range of all or most social studies topics and all grade levels, elementary, middle, and high. So for the compelling question, there are a couple of things that a compelling question is and a couple of things that a compelling question is not. So it's relevant to the content because you're using it to teach that content. It's relevant to the student and attention grabbing. That's where this idea of compelling comes in. It makes them want to answer it. It's more than just a yes or no answer, and it's an opportunity to share an informed opinion. A compelling question is not too content specific or narrow, leading to one correct answer, or unanswerable. So I have, is betrayal always bad, as my example of a good, compelling question, because it's not too content specific, but it is related to the content of the American Revolution when you look deeper at the question. It's also something that might pique the interest of the students. They might hear that question and want to have an opinion to an answer and might want to find an answer. A compelling question that might not work would be, what was the Proclamation of 1763? First of all, it's not super exciting for the student, and it's very content specific. It really only goes with that American Revolution unit. And then also, there is one correct answer. There might be a couple of different ways that you could say the answer, but there is one correct, and then there are incorrect answers to this question. By the end of the inquiry, the student should be able to use evidence to answer that compelling question, that kind of overall question. The way they get to that point is by answering supporting questions throughout the inquiry process. So, supporting questions scaffold the process of answering that compelling question. So, the compelling question I'm going to use as an example throughout this video is, who's to blame for the Cold War? The purpose of those supporting questions is to get the students to the point where they can answer that question. So, the first supporting question for this specific inquiry is, what tensions were visible during and immediately after World War II? Once they've answered that, they move on to, how did these tensions turn into actions by the US and Soviet Union? And when they've answered that, they can move on to, what arguments do historians make about who started the Cold War? On this blueprint, on this document, it shows how they kind of move across to build on each other. And it's also how we build that content knowledge. So we're starting with supporting question 1, we move on to 2, move on to 3, and then we can move on to answering that compelling question. So in that example, the first supporting question, what tensions were visible during and immediately after World War II? Then they can answer and move on to, how did these tensions turn into actions by the US and Soviet Union? And then they can move on to, what arguments do historians make? And then finally, again, answer that compelling question, that overall question for the inquiry. We use supporting questions to scaffold the compelling question. Students answer the supporting questions by completing tasks. So that's what we're going to talk about next, the actual tasks or checkpoints that students are completing throughout the inquiry process. The first task on the path to answering the question is staging the question. This is kind of like our hook for the inquiry, or our hook for the lesson. There are many different types of staging activities, just like there are lots of different types of hooks. So we have brainstorming, responding to a photo, responding to a video, responding to text, a KWL chart, making a prediction. The possibilities are really endless here. For that example that I'm using in this video, who's to blame for the Cold War, the staging activity that they provide is a respond to text, and it's to read an Atlantic article and discuss modern day tensions. But I went ahead and I'm trying to show that you can really use all of these. It doesn't have to be the staging activity that's provided in the inquiry. You could do a brainstorm where you're listing key players from World War II. Students could look at an image and then answer what kind of emotions they think people are feeling in a photo. They could watch the video duck and cover and answer, why was this video made, to get some of that prior knowledge out of them. They could create a KWL chart for the origins of the Cold War. They could predict what happens after World War II. So, in the actual inquiry that they have created for us, it's a respond to text, but you could really do what you'd like with this staging activity because it's intended to hook your students. After staging the question, students will work on these formative performance tasks. Students demonstrate their knowledge of the content, concepts, and skills through these formative performance tasks. So, in our example, who's to blame for the Cold War? The first formative performance task is to list and describe the ways in which tensions emerged during and after the war. So, in this task, they're having to show that they understand that content of the tensions before and during and after the war. Once they have shown that content mastery, they can move on to the next task, which is to create a T chart identifying aggressive actions by the Soviet Union and the US in the post war era. And here again, through completing this task, they are showing that content mastery of understanding the aggressive actions that were taken by the Soviet Union and United States. And once they've done that task, they can move on to writing a one-sentence summary of each historian's argument on who started the Cold War. And once they've moved on to that task, they can move on. So formative performance tasks grow in complexity during the inquiry process. They're going to start not very complex and then grow as you move on. So, for example, in that who's to blame for the Cold War inquiry, their first task is just to list and describe. And once they've done that, they can move on to create a T chart to identify the aggressive actions. And then once they've done that task, they move on to one that's a little bit more complex to write a one-sentence summary. So not only are they showing that content mastery and having to grow in content mastery throughout the tasks, but they're also getting more challenging tasks as they move forward through the inquiry. So tasks also align with the supporting question. So in our example, who's to blame for the Cold War? Our first supporting question is what tensions were visible during and immediately after World War II? In answering that question, they're completing the task, list and describe the ways in which tensions emerge. So they are aligned. The second question is how did these tensions turn into actions by the US and Soviet Union? And in that, they're creating a T chart identifying aggressive actions. So again, they're aligned, they're connected. And then the last supporting question is what arguments do historians make about who started the Cold War? And to complete that task to answer that question, they're writing one-sentence summaries after looking at historians' arguments. And they're summarizing what historians say. We use supporting questions to scaffold that compelling question, and students answer the supporting questions by completing tasks. Students use sources to find the evidence for those formative performance tasks. So that's what we're going to look at next, are those sources that students use when completing the inquiry. Each supporting question has featured sources that students use to complete formative tasks. So it really is all vertically aligned. For supporting question 1, they do the first task, which uses certain sources. For supporting question 2, they do the task using certain sources. And for question 3, they do the task using certain sources. So in our example, who's to blame for the Cold War? We see our supporting question 1, what tensions were visible during and immediately after World War II? They're listing and describing ways in which tensions emerged, and they find that list, they find their evidence for that task in those 3 featured sources that are listed below the task. Same thing with supporting question 2, how did these tensions turn into actions by the US and Soviet Union? In order to create that T chart, they're going to look at those 3 sources that are listed under the task. And then same with supporting question 3. After answering the question using the task by looking at the sources. So the goal is to give students the resources they need to complete the task and create an informed answer to that compelling question. So, again, we're growing towards being able to answer the compelling question, and these tasks are kind of like checkpoints along the way. And as they're completing these tasks, they're gathering evidence from the sources for each task so that eventually they can use that evidence, use those sources in answering the compelling question. The final task is the summative performance task. The summative performance task asks students to make an argument as an answer to the compelling question. So for our example, the summative performance task is to make an argument. It says, who's to blame for the Cold War? Construct an argument like a detailed outline, a poster, an essay that addresses the compelling question using specific claims and relevant evidence from historical sources while acknowledging competing views. And again, this is for an 11th grade inquiry. So this would not be the way that it is put for like a middle school or even a ninth grade inquiry. But in 11th grade, I think the intention is that it's very complex. And when it says construct an argument, it's really vague, but there's lots of different ways that you could have your students show you that argument and show you their evidence. They could make a poster, they could make a video, create a photo essay, write an essay, create an essay outline, write a letter. You could give them all these options and have them pick one. It really kind of depends on your students and what the content that's being taught, what would be appropriate for the content. After students have completed the final performance task, there are extensions provided on the blueprint. So there's the extension right under the argument, and then there's a taking informed action section. The extension tasks are opportunities for cross-curricular engagement, communicating what's been learned through the inquiry, and engaging in the content in a different way. So rather than creating an argument, it's going to be a different way, another opportunity for students to kind of show what they learned and show that content mastery. The extension task for Who's to Blame for the Cold War is conduct a mock trial where students put the US and Soviet Union on trial for starting the Cold War, and then play that out and have them provide evidence during that trial process. The taking informed action is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be students applying the results of the inquiry or applying what they learned to a real world problem. So for that, who's to blame for the Cold War, the taking informed action that's provided on that inquiry is going to be in this kind of 3-step process. First is to understand, research the current state of the relationship between Russia and the US. Then to assess the concerns expressed by both powers, and then to act by writing a letter to a government official that makes suggestions for improving the relationship. So each of these kind of extensions have their different goals, different intentions, and they are kind of optional for you to decide what's worth the time within your classroom and within your unit or lesson. So the last kind of part of this video is about where to find inquiries. There are pre-made inquiries on almost every social studies topic, including ancient history, European history, US government, human rights, US history, economics, world history, geography, culture, and civil rights. And they're also for every age and grade level. They have K through 12 available. Pre-made inquiries are available for free on the C3 Teachers website, and that website is c3teachers.org/inquiry. And when you go to this website, it's going to pull up this page, And there's a few things I want to point out about this website. This filter section is where I go first. I really kind of ignore this select hub option. This is going to be the different kind of hubs that are creating inquiries. And the select grade option is really useful, especially if you're looking for one that's really age appropriate and skill level appropriate for your kids. But honestly, almost any inquiry can be adapted and modified for what you and your students need. So I don't often look by grade. I usually come over here to this select topic section and go by the topic when I'm trying to find it. And it lists all of these topics. The number after the topic is going to be how many inquiries are on this website for that topic. So when you choose your topic, this first page is going to kind of give you just a first glance at the inquiries. So this 2020 protest inquiry is intended for 9th through 12th grade, according to this website. And again, that's going to be more of just a suggestion of grade level. Your inquiry can be modified for whatever grade level or whatever skill level you need. And as you scroll through, it just gives you kind of a first look at what these inquiries are. I want to go to that one that I've been showing, this Cold War inquiry. So you can see it's intended for 11th grade. It was created by teachers in Kentucky. When you click on to the name of the inquiry, it'll take you to this page that gives you a longer description of the inquiry. And then as you scroll down, it gives you kind of that first look at the compelling question, at the staging the question, and then it also shows you these supporting questions, the tasks, and the sources. And then down below, it'll give you the argument, extension, and taking informed action. To get to that sheet that I've been showing throughout the video, you would choose either this PDF option or this doc option that would take you to a Word document. And when you click into that, it gives you a lot. It gives you kind of this title page, and then the second page is going to be the one that we've been looking at, the one that kind of has the at a glance for the inquiry with the compelling question, the supporting questions, tasks and sources, and so on. And then as you scroll down, it'll go more into detail on each thing. So we have a really long description for the inquiry here. It's going to describe the staging the question. It's going to describe each supporting question and their intention in why they have created those supporting questions for the inquiry. It'll describe the summative performance task. And then down further, it starts to give you those sources. So again, everything on this website is free. So you don't have to go searching for the sources. They are here for you. So this would be source A for staging the compelling question. And then as you scroll down, we have source A for the supporting question, number 1. It's all here for you, and it has the citation for you as well. And then here we have source B for supporting question 1. So it's a huge packet. It gives you everything you need. Before the next video, take a look at the website and see if you can find one or two topics or inquiries or compelling questions that are of interest to you before you move on to the next video.